All right. Good morning, everyone. I think we've got everybody here that's going to be here today. So we'll start. We're just a minute or two late, but if everybody's had a chance to get a cup of tea or a drink that we're able to, that's fine. So we'll start open with the Karakia. Councillor Mackenzie, if you could help us with that.
Thank you. Kia tau mai te maramatanga, kia tau mai te rangamarie, kia tau mai te kaha me te aroha mo tēnei kaupapa, hui e tai ki e.
Thank you. So just a little bit of housekeeping. So we've started a little bit later today. Welcome to our strategy and policy meeting. This is our last meeting for the triennium. We've got Councillor Bryant on Zoom, and we know he's not well, so he may leave partway through. And we've got an apology for Mayor King, who's had to go to the Police Remembrance Day Parade, I think it's called, today. And so we'll start with, so we need to, first of all, that's the apology we got, because Mayor King won't be here. Would someone like to move?
There's an apology for lateness from Councillor Walker.
Apology for lateness. Would someone like to move that they be accepted? Move Councillor Dowler, seconded Councillor Tufnell. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. So public forum, and we've got Jacob Jobs, who's a Red Cross crisis responder. Jacob, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
It's Jace, actually, not Jacob, sorry.
It's Jace, yes. Can you hear me? Am I clear to speak?
Yes, we can hear you fine. You're coming through and you're on the big screen. So welcome.
Excellent.
And you've got roughly 5 minutes. So I'll give you a call at the end of that. Thank you.
I'll be concise, and you may have questions as I finish, but I will be brief. My subject of talking to you is your approval of the rally race and its use of recreational fossil fuels. That's my reason for speaking. I am a Red Cross volunteer. Red Cross volunteers, we respond to a lot of natural disasters. We're sort of like the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. When something has already happened, we respond. And in the rare cases where we can avert a natural disaster, we try to respond to that too. But mostly the things that have already happened. And so things that are going to come up with extreme weather events are going to affect me personally. They're going to affect all of the disaster relief community, and they are going to affect it adversely as it appears. We are now sort of unequivocally looking at an increase in extreme weather events to the point of very cataclysmic type events. And they are going to stretch all of our resources, but they are going to maybe specifically really stress the kinds of ways that we have responded to national emergencies, natural emergencies. We may not have the capacity to do that anymore. And to the extent to which we are not able to respond to natural catastrophes, large weather events, we're putting ourselves in real jeopardy. We're putting ourselves in dire jeopardy, because if we don't respond to it adequately, then you can imagine what we have is an sort of an unmitigated disaster. And the mitigation of that disaster is what I want to speak to you about today. I want to make it clear to you, and I know that you know this, I know that you've heard this before, but the science is unequivocal on the connection between fossil fuel burning in our atmosphere and extreme weather events. This is not anymore a matter of conjecture, of prospective events. This is now clear. We are in the era of consequences, but we are nowhere near the era of dire consequences that are coming. We know this to be true. We know this scientifically with great certainty, that we are increasing our era of dire consequences. And I want to avert this. And what we have to do is we really have to address this, even at this local level. We really need to address this. We need to get it in our minds that we are no longer able to skirt by doing things as we have done them. We need to really address this, else the consequences will be more than we would ever have been able to conceive of. They are coming true to us now in a great confirmation of the projections that have been made in science. A few of those are: farmers are losing their land to crop failure, all mostly in the tropical regions, causing enormous suffering and suicides and dislocation. We have tens of millions of climate refugees already, but we're going to start seeing hundreds of millions and up to 1.1 billion climate refugees in the coming decades. As people in New Zealand, we can expect to be required to accept those refugees to our land. So to think that we are just sort of like sitting outside of the dire consequences of climate change, we are not. We are going to have to resettle millions of climate refugees. I really want us to stress this. Our way of life is imperiled in the sense that our country is going to have to relocate millions of climate refugees from the tropical regions, which are going to become uninhabitable. They are becoming uninhabitable today. We are now looking at whole island nations and coastal areas that are becoming inundated. That is the beginning of something that we know is going to increase and accelerate. The only way that we can address this is to reduce burning of fossil fuels in our atmosphere. That is our only mechanism at this point. And we are not looking at any great silver bullets to mitigate that effect. So when I hear that we are encouraging recreational use of fossil fuel burning, then I become alarmed. And I think that the methodology that you may have used in calculating the effects of that or the extent of that was probably miscalculated. When these rally people, they bring their vehicles to our region, they are on big utes with trailers hauling those vehicles. The vehicles will, of course, burn around. It's a petroleum festival. That's essentially what this is. It's a festival of petroleum, and the real impact of that is going to be felt in future generations. It's going to be felt in our Pacific communities, in the tropical regions, the coral reefs dying, in the many hazards that we are facing through climate change. I would implore you not to make the mistake of thinking that our little contribution is not contributing mightily to the effects that we are already now seeing. An actual impact of this rally and of our continued business of usual burning of fossil fuels is actual deaths. 35 million people displaced last couple of weeks in Pakistan, 1,400 dead. We are actually causing that catastrophe. This is not something where there's some outside agency. It is our economy, our lifestyle, our use of fossil fuels, which is creating this. We are imperiling and now actually, what would be the word? I do not want to use the more extreme words. Our actions are causing this suffering and death.
So your 5 minutes is up, Jason. Jace, sorry. So you've made your point quite clearly.
Yes.
We don't normally have questions other than questions of clarification. And I think your points have been made very clearly. Does anyone have any points of clarification? I'm not seeing any. So Jace, thank you very much. You gave us a clear message. Okay.
Very good.
Thank you. Right, so we'll just move on to from that to declarations of interest. Is there any new declarations of interest for today? I see none. No late items. And then, so we'll start with the first report. And I think it's Amy is bringing that up to us today. And it's a review of the joint. What have I missed? Oh, I've got to do the confirmation of minutes. So we might just do that while you're sitting down, Amy. Top of the run sheet. So yeah, I missed that little bit. My fault. So minutes of the strategy and policy meeting held on the 18th of August. Would someone like to move that those be a true and correct record? Have I got to move? I've got Councillor Turley, seconded Councillor Butler. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right. Amy, over to you. And I see you've got Mr. Stevenson with you and also Mr. Kirby. So joint waste management minimisation plan and a review.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Morena kia ora koutou. We will take the report as read and invite any comments and questions.
I've got a comment. I was on that committee last time, and the one thing that made it harder was we added people partway through who hadn't sat through the hours and hours of submissions and reports that the other members had done, and it just made it a little bit difficult. And I remember Councillor Bryant commented about it as well, and I see his hand is up. So that's the one comment. When you do appoint a subcommittee, just keep it for the whole process and don't change it. So we'll start with Councillor Bryant and then go to Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question for you, Amy, to Amy or David, just in relation to the recommendations. I do wonder if we should have someone on that panel that would be a member of the Joint Landfill Committee. I think that would be a good idea, just because there is a lot of connection between these two things. Obviously, we don't know who that would be at this stage, but I think we should make provision for that. And secondly, I'm assuming that a similar recommendation is going to Nelson City Council or has been.
Through the Chair, thank you. Yes, this report has gone to Nelson City Council's Infrastructure Committee on the 1st of September, and they've approved all the resolutions. On your first point, it will be up to the new council to appoint the working party. If they choose to appoint a business unit rep, that would probably be helpful.
Thank you.
Right.
And I agree with the chair around how last time we appointed extra people, we certainly don't want to do that again. That was really challenging for us, those of us who were on the working party.
Thanks. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you. So, I mean, I note in the report you talk about 46% of the landfill coming from commercial and industrial waste. So I'm just wondering, in terms of the project team, you know, you've got the medical officer of health and you've got climate change specialists, and then any expert or stakeholder is needed. Should we actually have someone who can represent that commercial and industrial waste 46% in there?
Through the Chair, thank you. Yes, we do hope to involve those parties and within the project team if they need to attend meetings, but certainly through pre-engagement.
Yeah, I really hope that perhaps as part of the project team, you know, kind of working with us.
Thank you.
Councillor McNamara.
Happy to remove the report. Just a question. One of the outcomes of the last scenario where we ended up adopting figures as part of the plan. I'm just wondering how we're going in terms of meeting those projections.
So I'm happy to speak to that. So in terms of our 10% reduction per capita by 2030, we translated that into interim targets in the activity management plan, which are a slow decrease in the first 4 years, and then in the outer years, an increasing, accelerating decrease. So we are on track at the moment in terms of the 10% target. Although to be fair, the target was small reductions in the first years of the plan, and then greater reductions in the later 8 years of the plan.
So if I may just follow up. So, for instance, I imagine that the recent weather events is going to have an impact on our target. So projecting forward, we're still looking like we're meeting.
Through the chair, we haven't seen you're right that these weather events do bring extra waste in, and but we haven't seen the data for that yet at this stage.
Councillor Tufnell?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I do need a seconder.
Yeah, happy to second, Mr. Chairman. You have to take the point that the two things I'm going to talk about are details, but as this is my last opportunity to have them recorded, and that's the two things that I've noted really is that the drums, the containers that are put in front of people's homes to put their stuff in, they could do with a better coding on them, particularly with reference to the type of plastic that's acceptable. I'm quite sure that the average Joe Blogs will look at something and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then think, now hang on. So I think a little bit of a tidying up there. And the other one, and I know we've had discussions on this in the past, but there's a huge amount of waste out of our construction industry. And just as an example as to what happens, there's a gentleman that drives around Richmond on a Sunday morning, and he's got a lovely little ute, and he stops at all the bins. And he's got a little stick, and he goes in there, and he actually resurrects an incredible amount of material that is usable out of those bins. And it goes to the Nielsen waste or whatever, and it's sold. He just for himself keeps the copper wire, and that's enough for him to get an overseas trip. So look, all I'm suggesting is that somewhere along the line, we do need to do a bit better education or a bit of a tidying up in this department. Thank you for your tolerance.
Mr. Stephen, do you want to respond to that? Because I do know that you have worked with those industries.
Sure, a couple of things. So you're right, the education, particularly on what's recyclable and what's not, that's an ongoing project. And so you might have noticed just in the last newsline, we did an extra update story there. We've done some surveys to see where people are not sure about stuff, and we're just trying to focus on the things that people aren't sure about. And certainly construction waste is something that we are looking at. You might recall we've been successful in some funding for the Richmond Resource Recovery Centre and doing some waste diversion there. And again, with the building companies, it's an ongoing project to engage with the building companies. And it's that balance there between, letting people make the change themselves versus other tools to make the change happen. But yeah, that's an ongoing project as well.
Councillor Dow.
Yeah, I was going to second it if no one else had, but thanks. Yeah, back in the day, I can remember Councillor Bryant, Julie Nedger and myself on the initial committee of getting the landfills put together. And our sister council next door had 3 representatives as well, and only 2 representatives ever turned up. That was quite disappointing, and I hope that any new joint committee that comes forward will have full commitment by the councillors that are appointed. It was very disappointing to see that 3rd councillor only turn up on the last day, and yeah, just a bit of history there. But I am fully supportive of this. I do hope that once this gets going, we start looking outside the square for the other options that are out there. I've had someone banging on my door for the last few weeks regarding our plastic milk bottles and stuff wanting to be taken away to a place in Hamilton to get made into wall products instead of jib board and stuff. There's the other outfit that's developing that machinery down in Christchurch that want to put there and zap it all and make oil out of it at the finish. So yeah, it's quite imperative that the future is taking all that sort of stuff into consideration. So that's all I have to say, but well done what I've seen.
Thank you for that. So we've got no more questions. It's moved, Councillor McNamara, seconded Councillor Tufnell. I intend to put the motion. So all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. So that's that one done. So we've got the freshwater planning update. And I see it's got Lisa's name on here, but I see Barry's in the office. And it looks like that pack's still giving you problems.
Morning, Chair and councillors. Unfortunately, Lisa can't make it this morning. Erin Hawke, who's on Zoom, is going to introduce the paper for you. You ask the questions.
All right. So this Erin, over to you.
Oh, tēnā koutou katoa. Yes, there's a freshwater paper. It's had a number of contributors to it. So we take the paper as read. The contributors were Mirka Langford and myself, and Barry's had some involvement, and so is Helen Lane. So if you've got any questions, I'll direct them to the appropriate person. The paper contains an update on the Tasman Environmental Plan, the Waimea Nitrate, Waikato Pupu Springs, our Te Mana o Te Wai Implementation Program, and a few other things. So I will thank you and leave it over to the floor.
Right, if nobody's got, Councillor Tufnell's going to start.
Yeah, thank you. In page 17, item 1.4, the report also covers other freshwater related work streams. Well, could you just give us a broad picture on what that refers to?
Well, there's the Water Services Act, which requires us to map source water protection areas. So that's one of the ones off the top of my head. We're also going to have to help farmers with their freshwater farm plans. Yep, just wherever freshwater touches the community, really. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that, Barry?
Yes, under 1.4 there's a number of items listed. That includes our implementation program around Te Mana o Te Wai, which is a joint initiative between the three Top of the South councils and ATIWI. Here's the acronym TPK or Te Puna Carrero, and that's an ongoing piece of work collaboratively across the Top of the South that's helping to implement the National Policy Statement for Freshwater. So we're looking at one initiative rather than three councils and ATIWI working separately on that. And as part of that work, one of the first steps in implementing the Freshwater National Policy Statement is defining what we call our freshwater management units, which are the catchments and the unit of measurement or unit of management that we're going to use to manage freshwater. So they're the additional work streams that we're referring to there.
Yeah, thank you for that. I wasn't sure whether there was something really majorly significant there. Thank you.
Councillor Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in relation to the freshwater farm plans, and I'm on page 23 at 8.9, Erin and Barry. Just as we're expecting most sizable farms to have a freshwater farm program of equivalence by the end of this year, that seems quite ambitious. When further up in 8.6, we're still only expecting the regulations anticipated in October of 2022. How are we planning to achieve that? That most farms will have a freshwater farm plan by the end of this year. That seems highly unlikely.
Perhaps Mirka, is she available to answer that?
Yeah, I can answer that. Farms don't have to have a freshwater farm plan by the end of the year. From what I can, the documents aren't out yet from the ministry, but I think for Tasman, we're probably somewhere at the end of 2023. there is discretion in that how we roll it out. So it doesn't mean that all of the 1,700 farms that we've got in Tasman that need one have to have one by the end of 2023. We just have to have a program in place to roll them out. So it's probably likely that we will start with priority catchments or priority risk land users. And then it will be over 5 or 10 years. Then I have to have a certified plan immediately. It's not possible.
Thank you for that, Mirka. Will that be communicated to the farmers and rural community in some sort of priority order that they'll be expected to have plans? Because as I've been reading this, you'd just about have your heart would just about meet a couple of beats if you thought you had to have a farm plan in place by the end of this year.
I expect that what I expect is that we hear from the ministry when our region comes up. So they have got an order of regions to roll out the freshwater farm plan program. So once we are up, we will then have to work with the ministry on how we roll it out and then communicate that to our landowners.
Yeah,
there's still a lot of detail that they haven't told us yet. So we'll wait and see.
Yeah, perhaps I should have asked the associate minister about that as well.
Yeah, we're all waiting.
Thank you, Mirka. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you through the chair. I just wanted to explore a little bit further the section 8 of the report around the Waimea nitrate project. So we say in the report that we've got high levels of nitrate in some places, so that's evidenced by the monitoring. We say in the report that elevated levels are a concern for human health. We've heard before that we mix the water in our bores so that in actual fact the water that we deliver has a lower rate. We say that we've notified households who might pump their own water and that we're waiting on information from the Ministry of Health. So wrapping all of that together, I guess my question would be, have we really stood back from it and said, what's the worst scenario? What's the worst case scenario of what could actually happen, particularly if the Ministry of Health came out with different guidelines? And if we understood what's the worst case scenario, are we doing enough to actually avoid that worst case scenario happening?
Barry, I'll let you try and answer that.
Through the chair, good question. In terms of what we're doing on the ground, so there's still a lot of unknowns in terms of the sources of nitrates, how much is an historic issue ongoing and how much is new. There's some work that's going on in the background with all the growers and with horticulture in New Zealand. But we're looking to rerun what we call the model that looks at nitrate losses, what are the contributions to groundwater, what's the likely effect of that. We hope to have that information early next year, which will help us get a better understanding on where's the nitrate coming from. And that's one of the unknowns, and it's been a perennial issue with the system because it's quite complex. It's not just a simple graphical aquifer where the nitrate goes in the top, comes out the bottom. There's a bit of mixing and things, variable levels. So it'd be speculation to think about what's the worst case scenario. Certainly with new practices and good practices from growers, we anticipate that the problem's not getting worse in terms of increasing amounts of nitrate going into the aquifer. But in terms of what's the contribution, and then off the back of that, what's the range of solutions that we might consider, that's still a work in progress. So I can't give you a straight answer. That's the best I can give you.
Okay, because I mean, I sort of feel when I read the report, I sort of felt that it might have been 3 years ago when I was first reading a report about this issue. So I don't feel as though personally I've seen, I mean, I can understand a lot of work is going on. I don't disagree with that, but are we doing enough work? I mean, are we putting enough resources into this problem to make the progress that we need to make?
through the chair, we need to prioritise. We have limited resources, as you're aware, and we have to balance those resources across a number of environmental issues across Tasman. And so, that will ultimately come back to the council, but we're committing as many resources as we can, and working with Horticulture New Zealand to leverage off the resources that they have is probably one of the best options we have to progress things quicker than if the council just did it itself.
I mean, I guess it leaves me with not really, so I'm hearing we're putting in the resources that we can, we have limited resources, but I don't have enough information to understand whether the risk of this body of work is higher than anything else. So I can only assume that you're doing those kind of risk-based assessments and applying the resources that we've appropriated for you to the dealing with the highest risk. So there we go. That's a convoluted question, isn't it?
Through the chair, short answer is yes, we are. We continually review the work that we're doing in terms of changing priorities as well. So we've got changing legal obligations, changing priorities. You've still got the public health risk that's not going away, that we need to be really conscious of as well. So it's an ongoing, as you say, we don't just set it in stone and leave it. We're continuing reviewing those.
And probably the good news is when I read about what's going on the Canterbury Plains, our problem is a lot smaller, but it's still there. Councillor Ogilvie.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. I was just going to underline the same question that Councillor Mackenzie has raised, because it is a serious public health concern. And I have to ask myself, I mean, Councillor Mackenzie saying 3 years ago, I can remember probably a similar report 6 years ago, and been giving the answer that we are diluting and things are within the, I suppose, the standards of the Department of Health and et cetera, but there doesn't seem to be a great deal of improvement in that time. And it is a continuing concern that we have for a large population in our district being affected by potential nitrates in their water supply with some health issues as a result. So I don't want to emphasise the risk, but I don't want to minimise it either. And it says here we're waiting for advice from the ministry. Can we put some pressure on the ministry for that advice so we do know what we can do or what we can't do? I suppose another question is, when the dam comes on stream, what impact, beneficial or none, will that actually have? And I suppose I can ask the same questions of the water sea entity when it comes into existence. But currently it's our problem now. We have to address the problem as a very serious concern.
I might ask Mr. Kirby, you're probably thinking about something else, but I'm just thinking in terms of our bores, and you've given this reply before. We mix our water that we take so that we are less than half the standard, as I understand it.
Yes, that is correct. And obviously, if it gets any worse, we would reconsider whether we draw from the aquifer that has the high nitrogen levels, and then we'd have to look at another source. And the obvious one is a surface abstraction from the Waimea River. But that's something that we can face up. But at the moment, we certainly meet the well within the criteria for nitrate levels in our water supplies.
If I can just add to that, we'll have a pretty serious monitoring process that we go through with all our fresh, our water supplies. So there's stringent systems and processes in place to ensure that public health is the top of our priority. If that helps to answer the question a little bit.
Thanks, Mr. And I think that response from the two managers is very important, just to give the balance, probably that I've raised, but I think it's a balance which we need to get out to the public as well.
And the other thing is, in terms of nitrates, as we've seen before, it's not a quick fix. It takes many years for it to move through the system. So it's not something that will be done overnight. Councillor Dowling.
Yeah, firstly, a comment about the farm plans. I've mentioned it before that I've got a brother-in-law in the horticultural industry, and he has 7 farm plans. He has to have a farm plan for each country he exports his fruit to. every year that comes in, they come in and they audit those farm plans to make sure he hasn't changed or doing something nasty that he shouldn't be. And it costs between $5,000 and $7,000 per plan. So a lot of these places, well, all those places that export fruit are dealing with the same thing. As he said to me the other day, you lot are going to throw another bloody plan at me. He said, you've got to be joking. You better tell them to come out here and sit down and tell me which one I can use. And that's where it's going to come from. You're going to get I think you're going to get a lot of kickback sometimes from it. But so that's that part of it. Just a comment. But my one is about the nitrates too. Like we've built a dam. There's going to be a lot of change of land use coming up in the near future, which we heard from the presentation we heard the other day from the Waimea, whoever it was that spoke to us. I assume council will get proactive and start going out to these people and say, whoa, hang on a minute. If you're going to start doing the change of land use and you're going to start growing veggies or stuff, you better watch what you're doing. You better preempt them now instead of waiting and then going out and saying, stop. I'd like to be proactive and not reactive. So that's just a comment. Thanks.
I can state that we've already met with a lot of the growers out there because I attended some of the meetings on behalf of the council with the staff. So that has already been done.
The potential new growers.
But well, it was all the landowners on the plains. So it covered, and if you have a look at the plains, there isn't too much of it in just straight pasture. There are some, but not all of it.
I just want the chair, if I can just respond to the first statement rather than question. I think, the previous session held with the minister, the message was clear around, the three waters, the messaging coming from government, and then as local government, we're having to pick up actually responding. It's similar to a lot of this stuff that's coming through from central government. And the reality is that we have to sort of translate that to our community. Government will do it in a different way. We need to communicate it to our community. So I think those communication plans going forward, when we get the facts, are really important to our farming community, and we need to lead a little bit of that, unfortunately.
I've had to do those plans myself in the past. Councillor Butler.
Yeah, just to follow on that comment that I mean, I think this is still a lot of anxiety out there because the science isn't quite settled yet as to acceptable nitrate levels. We've got the Danish study, and then we've got our own Ministry of Health that they, levels that they're setting. So, yeah, that contributes to the anxiety. But my question actually of the first one was as regards the communication with farmers and the recharge zone of the Waikarepupu Springs. Is that actually going smoothly? Are you having to wait until you get the water conservation order, or are you doing some preemptive discussions? Because I do know that the point is made that there may have to be some changes in farming.
Murphy or Barry or both?
Yes, in relation to the water conservation order and the recharge zone in the Tākaka Valley, yes, we are talking to the farmers in the context of the case. The water conservation order is likely to set environmental limits, which potentially could have significant and far-reaching impacts on farming practices and also the local economy. So we are having ongoing discussions more in the context of the legal proceedings at the moment, but a natural extension of that is what are the implications for the broader community. So those discussions are ongoing, and once we get a clearer steer from the court, then we'll certainly be into that space. And in relation to the work we started in April around an action plan to look at initial actions we might take in terms of reducing nitrate inputs into the aquifer, that work is ongoing. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I just had one other question, which was just a question about the statement that apple growers' crops are being negatively affected from irrigating with aquifer water with elevated nitrates. Is that new? Is that something new? I've never heard of that.
I can speak to that if you like. So that's growers that have spoken to me, in particular growers on the plains, and it affects the colour. So they still grow the apples, but it's the colour of the apple, because when you're selling to a European market or a particular market, there is what they call colour standards, and with the higher nitrates, they believe that it affects the colour. So there's two significant orchards that are, I don't know, a couple of hundred hectares on the plains that have indicated that the nitrates affect the colour. But I haven't seen the science, but that's what they tell us. And those have been at those meetings where they've had vegetable growers and apple growers at those same meetings when I've been there.
It's quite significant, really, isn't it, for our export industry, horticultural export.
They have an alternative. They can take the water from somewhere else. So they are not in dire straits at all. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, through the chair. I think we hear on several different ways that the Ministry of Health needs to lift its game. And for the council, we need to be more proactive while we're gathering this data. The evidence has been brought to us that we're diluting the water on the plains to 4.6 milligrams per litre. And Dr. Tim Chambers of Otago University put out an appeal to local bodies to take a precautionary approach and reduce the nitrate level to 1 milligram per litre. That was about 6 months ago, may have been a little earlier than that. And the Danish study in 2018 of 2.7 million people showed an increased risk of colorectal cancer, where nitrate levels in drinking water were above 0.87% per litre. So the evidence speaks for itself. That's only one international study. And you know, the concern is it's affecting the ripening of the apples, but there's a far greater concern if we're not addressing this issue. And I think we should be more proactive in approaching the Minister of Health and asking them for some direction. My understanding from Mr. Kirby is that we dilute the water, and I'm wondering, we've had ample rainfall, could we not dilute it more so that the nitrate level is even reduced to perhaps 1 milligram per litre?
So there's a couple of people that answer that. John, do you want to answer first?
Well, I'll have a go and then I'm sure Richard will. So I think I'll take on this. We're looking at the Ministry of Health for direction on this. Hear what you're saying, but the direction, correct me if I'm wrong, comes from the Ministry of Health in terms of acceptable levels of nitrates, etc.
Yeah, that's correct for the drinking water standards. And then I understand that the Ministry of Health takes the World Health Organization guidelines, so that's the way it comes down to New Zealand.
If you talk to the staff at the hospital, and the levels of bowel cancer that we're dealing with are high. So, you know, it is important. We can't just put our heads in the sand and ignore it.
Well, I wasn't dismissing what you said. I hear you. I guess our direction is from the Ministry of Health, and that's where the direction comes from. Right or wrongly, that's where it comes from.
But if we've got the water available, can we not do something about it? I mean, because we've taken that on ourselves to already do it. It was up at about 11 point something. We've brought it down to 4.6. I would like it to come down to at least 1 milligram if we can do that, and rather than the water just going out to sea.
Yeah, I know we did reduce it after the last discussion. I'd have to talk with the team about that again. I'm not sure it's as simple as what you outlined, because we have got abstraction limits from the various aquifers, and we are constantly monitoring that. And it's all right to say that with the heavy rain now, but in 2-3 months' time, we might be back to where we are now. So And what we're talking about is not something, if we fix it now, all this is going to stop, because it's an ongoing thing forever and a day. And that's why the Ministry of Health need to come out with some really strong recommendations from here on to the future.
I agree, but I think we need to be getting some response from the Ministry of Health. We need to contact them and ask for a response.
I'm aware that our staff do talk to the Ministry of Health, so your point is well made, Councillor, and I'm sure the staff will take a discussion forward. We'll move to Councillor Hill.
Thank you, through the chair. I mean, I'd like to express my concerns too around the nitrates in the Waimea Plains, as I have previously. You know, there are, I guess I'm wanting some reassurance that we are confident that the people who are taking their water from the bores, their own bores, the measures that they need to take, that we're confident that that's happening, and have any issues come to light in that area.
At the moment, if private bore owners are taking nitrated water, that's their responsibility, and obviously if they've got a consent with us, an abstraction consent, we can notify them and say they probably need to get their water tested. Otherwise, if they're taking it themselves and they don't need a consent from this council, then I suggest that some education from the Ministry of Health in regard to that would be suffice. And I think there has been education gone out anyway to have their water tested to make sure their nitrate levels are within acceptable limits.
So our only responsibility is to notify those people.
Well, our responsibility is obviously who we supply water to, and we're actually doing that. We've discussed that. The only other area that we could, and I'm not sure it's our responsibility, but when people apply for an abstraction consent to take water out of an aquifer, we can recommend that they, I don't think we can make it a condition that it's got to be below certain nitrate levels, but we recommend to them that if they want to take the water out, they get it tested and they modify their abstraction to account for any high levels of nitrate.
Do we have any level of understanding of what people are doing who have those bores? Like, this is an area of concern for me, and I understand that we have, you know, formally responsibilities that are formalised, and I'd like to think that we would, and I think we have, in terms of educational, an educational approach around, you've got a bore in this area, you have to be very alert to the nitrate levels in it. I guess I'm wanting a higher level of reassurance that we've done all that we can, whether we're required to or not, to be confident that people are taking the measures that they need to be, or that they are aware of their nitrate levels.
Through the chair, there's a significant amount of information on TSF's website. We've been in contact, certainly we know where the bores are with the highest nitrate readings, and bore owners have been contacted in relation to the implications of high nitrates and being provided with advice around where to go to seek further information, contact the medical officer of the house, and they've been provided with information on what to do if they do have high nitrates in their water. We can't force people to do anything about it, but we've certainly provided those bore owners with the information that we have, and the team's been working with the drinking water assessor and the medical officer of health around this issue. So it's an ongoing thing that we're aware of.
Thank you. And just in terms of the work streams generally presented in the report, I mean, that seems like a whole lot of work going on. And I know that the WCO process has amped things up in terms of staff time and resource. If you were to be better resourced, I'm assuming there would be an impact from that. What would the impact be? Like, what areas would timeframes shift, or there'd be further effectiveness in terms of this whole area?
Through the chair, I guess there's two parts to that question. If we were better resourced, I guess what would that resourcing look like? Staff did an initial assessment when the 2020 National Policy Statement was released with additional obligations. To meet those obligations in a timely manner, we anticipated or estimated it would be between another 12 to 18 additional staff to fully meet the obligations that the government has put in front of us. Clearly, that's not achievable. I guess the second point there, what is realistic? Look, I anticipate we'll come back to the new council after the elections to brief councillors on what is achievable, what's realistic. By then, we'll have better indication of what the replacement of the Resource Management Act is and what that means in terms of additional obligations and additional workloads. It's not going to mean less work. Invariably, new legislation means more work, not less work. But once we have those pieces of the puzzle, then we'll be better positioned to actually provide a decent advice to the council. So
thank you. I'm aware of quite a few of you, under the pump with, sorry about the pun, might have been a pun, but look, thank you for the work that you're doing. There's a lot going on here. And, when we're sitting in I think with the WCO process, we're sitting in some unknowns still really about that. There's been some indication, but I don't think we should underestimate the impact of that on certainly the people at home and you all with your work. I'm happy to move the report if it hasn't been. Thank you.
I just wonder, Councillor, if we can just add a little bit of response to that. And I applaud you for your comments. I guess we've got to be careful not to view this bit of work in isolation. So when we're looking at our resourcing, we do look about what moves the needle and what doesn't, and that's certainly something Leonie's certainly driving us hard on around as an organisation. What moves the needle and where do we put our resource in, rather than, I don't want to give the impression we're throwing resources everywhere. We're trying to put it where it's needed. So that's this state of play is going to be over the next 12 to 18 months around what does this look like for our organisation, particularly with Three Waters and the pressures from elsewhere. So we've got to be really careful, I think, how we manage, and also the expectation, and I mean this with love, in this chamber around what workload we're putting onto our team. We might be pushing back a little bit on some of the stuff to say, actually, it doesn't move the needle. If we do this, it's going to change things.
Thank you.
Yep. Councillor McNamara, so it's been moved. Are you happy to second it? Good.
So just a question of clarification around process. So if the Department of Health manage to get back to us ever, or change their, or give us a new direction, suppose it is 1, 2, 3%, how do we meet that nitrate levels?
Are you talking about nitrates, Councillor?
Yes.
Right. Well, the process at the moment, the Ministry of Health would actually notify Taumata Arawai to alter the drinking water standards, and Taumata Arawai would then notify us. Then we would have to look at the implications of that. And as I stated earlier, if the implications are that under our current abstraction regimes, we're going to struggle to meet that, that means that one aquifer bore, one aquifer that we utilise, we probably have to no longer utilise, and we have to put some other infrastructure in place to get water from somewhere else, like a surface abstraction for the Waimea River. But that's something that we would consider further down the track when we know what we have to do.
Councillor Turner, you had a question?
Well, just a comment really. We are proactive in many areas, like SDAs and farm plans and things like that. Yet we know we have a problem here, and people expect the water, the council water, comes out of the taps to be drinkable. So I think that we need to ensure that it is, and I really, process, we can work around what is the best way of achieving the outcome that we need.
Taking that on board. But a comment?
Yeah, can I caution, we know we get reports from all sorts of sectors about certain things, and we've got to be really, really careful we don't just ad hoc change things because somebody's reported something. I'm not discounting the relevance of this discussion around nitrates, but there is a process to be followed. We're not just going to ad hoc make changes because there are implications to those changes. We need to wait until the medical people have gone through the due process and notified us accordingly.
Right, well, that's a very valid point, but I do take Anne's point as well. All right, so the motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. So we now move to the Strategic Policy, Environmental Policy Activity Reports. I think Alan, it looks like you're leading off.
Very briefly. Yeah, unfortunately, Dwayne is not available today. So Walter and I will cover the community policy or the strategic policy update, with me doing the community policy and Walter the infrastructure planning. So from my point of view, just one kind of comment. So one of the items in the table is the Tasman Climate Action Plan, and it notes that we were due to bring the sort of the annual report on progress through to the November meeting of this committee, and I gather that meeting is no longer happening. So what we'll propose to do is to just circulate that to you via diligence. But with that said, I'll take my bit as read and I'll hand over to Walter.
Right, so I was just going to try and say that because these reports are always split into areas, so yours goes up, your area that you're going to cover is up to page. Oh, yeah, it's 31. So questions of Alan, anyone? Councillor Dow.
Yeah, better off funding. I see that they're talking with the iwi general managers and are finalising the funding proposal to be done by tomorrow. Are we on target?
Yes, we're on target. So Amy's busily working on the submission at this point, or the application at this point. So yep. So
you're covering that area?
Yes, I am. I just have one comment to make around the IAF application. There's some news there that Wakatu has now signed a housing outcomes agreement with Kainga Ora. So we're waiting for the final sign off by the minister, and then that can progress to actually receiving the funding of 1.2 million.
Well, that is good news and some progress. And with that, we'll move to Councillor Ogilvie because it's some good progress for his.
I'll second the resolution. It hasn't already been seconded, Mr. Chair. And look, that is good news. I can ask the question, where are we with that process, Walter? So thank you very much for the answer. But looking at the page 32, 33, it's the speed management plan. I think that delay is unfortunate and is quite concerning as well, because again, it's been something which has been ongoing for some time, and the number of people out there on the various roads who would like to see the speed limit reduced from 50 to 30 or 80 to 60 or whatever the case may be. So delaying that speed management plan because we've lost two of our staff members, I suppose Drew and Claire, is a nuisance, I know, but can we address that as a reasonable degree of urgency, please, Walter, or through you to Dwayne or to John?
Passing, I've got the baton thrown to me. My understanding is there's some statutory timeframes on this, and I can't recall when it's going to be done by. Can anyone recall?
Yeah, that is correct. Actually, there's some time frames that are not due just yet, so there's no urgent need in terms of meeting the time frames, but I do acknowledge the need from the community to progress with the speed management plan. But at the moment, we're trying to align with the statutory time frames.
So we're doing a bit of review of the work program at the moment, if that helps. We have got some resourcing gaps with 3 down in that team at the moment, and you sort of got to know what you're talking about. So I can't put any promises in there, but we need to. Sorry, I will come. We need to achieve the statutory timeframes there.
I think we had a program in mind whereby things were underway around about end of October and November in terms of the public consultation or communication, and then a plan was going to be out.
We're not going to achieve that
for comment by February, and then be confirmed by Easter of next year was the end date when it will become actually concrete in place.
our current recruitment stage, we're just not going to achieve that at the moment.
Right.
That's why we're just looking at our work plan, see what we can rejig to make sure we don't miss any statutory timeframes.
And a third question, I mean, I can't leave this council meeting, this policy and strategy, that meeting mentioning stormwater in Motueka. And, you know, quite seriously, I know I'm trying to say it in a jocular, happy, friendly way, but seriously, we were promised $100,000 of nuisance flooding repair in the June 30th decision by the council. And I'm just wondering, what stage are we at with that $100,000 allocation, please?
I'll let Walter.
Yeah, I can answer that question through the chair. So I spoke to the operations team, who is now working on implementing that plan. So they are looking at preparing a plan to have increased soakage and sump inlets. The focus area is around the Red Street, High Street intersection, and trying to get that resolved for that budget that's now available, came available through the adoption of the catchment management plan. Apart from that, there's the transportation team who looks at some upgrades throughout Motueka as well as part of the minor improvements.
Councillor Hill, and then I've got Councillor McNamara, Councillor Turley and Councillor Butler, and now Councillor Dowler.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Under infrastructure planning and policy heading at 3.2, there's a statement there about the policy and planning and policy team have been engaged with developing the 30-year Three Waters capital works and operational program for consideration by Entity C. Did I hear the other day that it was July 2024 that those programs would be set and known? Is that right? Have I missed that?
Through the chair, we are currently working towards a deadline to submit a first draft program by the end of October. And then there are two other timelines. The next one, then the second draft is in February, and the third one, I believe, is in July. Yeah.
I think the July, though, is the transition date where everything flips over.
July 2024 years. So at what point will we know just the program of works for Tasman in terms of Entity C? Do we know those dates? It'll be before July 2024. You assume there's a point prior to that roundabout where we'll know. I mean, well, I know the ministers.
Well, it's up to the entity, to be honest, I would imagine.
Yeah, through the chair, it's Rich is referring to. It's mainly what's in the LTP now, plus anything that we know needs to be done to meet legislation and growth. So that's basically it.
And so the 30-year program, what we've got lined up in our long-term plan in terms of and the timing of those works, that will just roll over. I mean, I'll just imagine. I mean, I think a lot of people out there. I mean, the minister made this point that there are small communities that are worried and small councils that are worried that they're going to be at the bottom of someone else's list. And people in the community are voicing that quite often about, oh, our works are never going to happen. How we're going to compete with Wellington and whoever else we're with up north there. I haven't quite finished.
Sorry.
Yeah. So the point is around, you know, that we've got our long-term plan and what we've got in there, and that's what feeds into Entity C in terms of what we need to have happen in Tasman. But, you know, it's sounding like, well, that'll just be sort of rolled over and accepted in some way. But I guess I'm wanting to know the point at which we know that actually some of those things are delayed or some are going to happen sooner or...
Richard, you're probably, because I think you're on the transitional.
I'm part of it.
Or one of them anyway.
Can I say that we're actually doing the same process we would normally do for an LTP if we forgot about the three waters. So we're actually looking to see what we need to do over the next 10 years and also upgrading our 30-year infrastructure strategy. It so happens that the three waters part of that study is probably going to be moving out of this council into the new water services entity. So come 1st of July 2024, what we had originally thought was going to be in our plan to go into our LTP is now going to be into the water services entity. Now, what they do after the 1st of July 2024 is going to be largely up to them. But at this point in time, we'll be putting in what we believe we need to have programmed for this district come 1st of July 2024. How they implement that later and the priorities, again, there may be some uncertainty concerns around that. But what we're doing now is what we would normally do in preparation for our LTP.
Thank you. And do we have any idea of the percentage of staff that will go to the entity in terms of, so I understand staff have been guaranteed work, jobs through the transition, and what's the percentage of council staff?
I think at the moment, I think we've got 22 staff that are allocated to go across into the new entity and those staff that are largely got 80% more of work within the three water entities. So that ranges from those that are directly in the operational side, those that are in the strategic planning side, as well as those in the project delivery side. So I think there's about 4 project managers that have been allocated to the entity. Now, what we don't know at this stage is other support services and what impact that's going to have and whether we're going to have redundancies or whatever. We haven't actually gone through that exercise at this stage. At this point in time, all we have done is allocated and looked at those staff that are likely to be transferred into the water services entity. They are in what we call a staff room that's been developed by the National Transition Unit. And they're looking at their terms and conditions of their employment, their job descriptions and the like, and starting to do some work about how they can be translated through. At this point in time, they've stated that they'll be translated through on their current terms and conditions, on their current job descriptions. And as time goes on and more rationalisation occurs, then changes will be made as and when things occur. So come 1st of July 2024, that's what we're aiming for, and aiming for which staff are going to be translated across.
Councillor McNamara.
Thank you. Has it been seconded? Councillor Ogle, we move it. I'm happy to second it. If you moved it.
I've got a mover and a seconder. It's Dalla and then Ogilvy.
Right. Back to the speed management process, which is quite a burden on our staff that we don't have. Perhaps one way we could ease the burden is by taking Councillor Tufnell's great overwhelming desire for amalgamation into consideration and perhaps doing a joint speed management plan with Nelson, because clearly the delineation is purely arbitrary and we all move between the two regions. So it would be nice to have a consistent approach that shares the burden. Is that possible?
Our staff as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, and something we'll certainly consider. And when we do all our work, is that cross working with Nelson. Yeah, so great point.
Councillor Tu.
Thank you, through the chair. Transport choices and streets for people funding applications. This new fund for transport choices is specifically to support transport initiatives to reduce vehicle kilometres travelled and greenhouse gas emissions from transport. And yet my understanding is, and this I want clarification on this, that the application made for $19 million for the program of active transport and public transport works is for urban areas. And yet our rural areas are where most of the cars come into Richmond from State Highway 6, Wakefield, Brightwater, and from State Highway 60 from Mapuru and Motueka. And I'm wondering why, when there's $350 million plus in that transport choices funding, why we've limited ourselves without looking at how we can get people. Well, I know people in Brightwater want to bike in, but you know, that highway from Brightwater to the Three Brothers Corner with logging trucks and things is extremely dangerous, and they won't use the tourist Great Taste Trail because it's not a direct link. So are we doing anything to look at those things that we could do to, you know, and get the funding from that transport choices funding? We're using Better Off funding for our share. I'm just wondering why it's just limited to the urban areas.
Is Richard going to reply to that?
I can do. I think the urban area, that's what the street choices has been focused on, because a lot of the short trips that can be undertaken by cycles is what the aim is, and also to help with kids going to school and the like. So that's where the government has focused it now. As far as rural roads and cycleways, I believe that's going to be further down the track. Suffice to say that I do see a lot of cyclists on the State Highway 60 and others, but from Brightwater to here, there is a cycleway right now. I use it quite frequently, and it's actually very, very good. It might add another 5 minutes rather than a direct route, but certainly it's a safe route, and certainly encourage people to do that. But the government, through Waka Kotahi, is largely focused around the urban areas because that's where the pinch points are. That's where a lot of the crashes occur between cyclists and vehicles. That's where there's a lot more potential conflict between them. So that's where the focus is at the moment. And the advantage with the Streets for People is that we get 90% funding for it. So why not go ahead with it? But at this point in time, it's not about putting cycleways all down state highways and rural roads at this point in time, though that may come eventually.
I wasn't actually asking for that. What I was asking for was funding from the Transport Choices Fund, and that was something that others on the Regional Transport Committee meeting on Tuesday were in support of. That it just, you know, because that's where a lot of the traffic is coming from.
So you're on that committee and you dealt directly with Waka Kotahi. So and you've made that point, I think.
So was from Jamie that it's just being used in the urban areas, and my question is why are we limiting it?
It's probably the criteria of the fund, isn't it? It is totally criteria of the fund. And it did Waka Kotahi, did you ask that question of Waka Kotahi at the Regional Transport Committee?
And we didn't really get a specific answer. We just got support from Yakult.
Well, I can tell you now that the criteria at the moment for Streets for People is focused on urban areas, full stop.
So it's a question for Waka Kotahi. So we could take that to Jamie to raise that with them. Okay. But that's what they've given us. So we've taken what funding we can. Councillor Butler.
Yes, for you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to find out a bit more about the new river management plans and whether or not they're going to be focused on gravel. It's just that gravel is such a hot topic at the moment, and people are upset about it. They think that because gravel's not being taken out of the rivers, we're getting flooding, all that. I just wondered what a river management plan will actually focus on, whether or not, what aspects of a river.
Through the chair, the river management plans will focus on specific sections of river. So the first one that we'll look at is the Upper Motueka. Gravel extraction is just one aspect of a river management plan. It's looking at everything within a certain corridor. It's hard to say exactly how wide. It's not a catchment management plan. We're not looking at the entire catchment, but we're looking at the most efficient, effective way to manage a certain stretch of river. And that includes gravel extraction, but it also includes how we manage river margins and planting, and how we protect through erosion protection, private land, for example. So it's a combination of all these things. Rather than doing one thing at a time in a reactive way, it's more a holistic view of all these things and how we can get a best management program, how we can put that together in the most integrated way.
So it could just consist of leaving the river to do its own thing, couldn't it? Because you know, managing rivers, in my experience, is not a very easy thing to do. Yeah.
Certainly right there. You can spend an awful lot of money on river protections, and then a week later, that money's gone down the road, down the river. Councillor Dowler, and then Mackenzie, and I've just seen Councillor Ogilvie.
Yeah, just back to the Koingiora thing. It's good to hear. I do think now that we're going to have to start being a little bit more proactive as a council as well. Part of that deal, I understand, will be putting a roundabout on the corner of Wakawera and Manoy Street for the extra traffic coming out onto that road. That'll be a council responsibility. I hope we do engage a consulting firm that does know how to design roundabouts. We've got a bit of an elephant at the clock there in Motueka. Also, I think we now need to immediately, or next term, start talking with Waka Kotahi, because we're going to be putting a roundabout to manage the additional traffic onto Wakawera Street. And 100 metres down the road, Wakawera Street goes onto State Highway 60, which is the black spot of the State Highway 60. There was not enough money to upgrade that corner on the upgrade that we've just done. So I think we need to be banging the door so that in the next round of funding, they start looking at improving that corner, which was indicated would be done sometime in the future. So I'm just bringing that to the fore, that we will do our best on the side street, and it's going to be an absolute damnation at the State Highway corner. Thank you.
I note that you've made a note of that. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you. Just two questions. Oh, are we up to Barry yet? Oh, sorry, wonderful, Barry.
Could be. Councillor.
Again, Mr. Chair, the river management plan, I've just read the paragraph again. Staff are working to scope an appropriate brief for this work and then engage a suitable standard, a consultant. The target completion date is the third quarter of 2023. So two questions, please. When you say the third quarter, is that by March of next year, which I know it's the first quarter, it's the third quarter of our year.
It'll be calendar year.
So it's calendar year, fine.
It'll be calendar
Just
year.
to clarify it. And secondly, the river being addressed as the Upper Motueka River. So by, let's say, September of next year, then we'll have a report on the river management. We'll have a plan, or just the scope of a plan.
Yeah, through the chair. No, we're aiming to have the plan done by then.
All right, and probably a follow-up question. There are 5 rivers involved here, and will the others be done reasonably soon after this first one being completed, or what's the process?
Yep, correct. And the plan is to do the next one straight after that, or potentially even start the second one running in parallel with this first one.
Right. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
So I think we'll move on now to Barry's section. And Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you. So two questions, Barry. Just on the Sds implementation plan. So what's the process to do that implementation plan, and what's the time frame associated with it? And then my second question really was, would be useful maybe just to get your take on the Mapua structure plan work, and you know, you're happy with how it's going and engagement with the community, etc.
Thank you. Yeah, through the chair. So the next step with the future development strategy is implementation, as you pointed out. Jackie Deans is just back from an extended break, getting over developing a future development strategy. So that is starting now. One of the key things is the initial work that will inform the long-term plan. So the work that's gone into the future development strategy then forms the basis for the inputs that go into our growth model, which inform a lot of the planning for the LTP around zoning, but also infrastructure provision and planning for that. So they're the initial steps. We'll have a project plan in the very near future in terms of the broader implementation of that, which we'll be able to share with the council. We've got Anna McKenzie behind me here who might like to comment on the observations. She's project managing the Mapua structure plan. I think the only thing I would add is that the questionnaire closed yesterday for Mapua. We anticipated we might get 100 to 150 responses. We've had well over 300 so far, and we're still counting. So awesome response from the community on the questionnaire that Anna put out on the structure plan. I'm not sure if you want to add to that, Anna.
Yeah, as of yesterday morning, we had, and it closed of business yesterday, we had 350 responses to the survey with a range of ages. So we feel that we've really reached out and got a good range of the community through that survey.
Okay, great, thank you. And with the FTA, so is the implementation plan, will that be a joint project plan with Nelson City?
Some parts of it will be, yes. Yeah, so we need to work jointly with Nelson around the rollout, around potential plan changes that are coming on stream, which will implement the future development strategy. We have our growth plan changes that were notified on the 19th September. Nelson City Council is in the process of developing its intensification plan change for Nelson City, which we're likely to see before the end of the year as well. So there's a number of initiatives that are ongoing that we work closely with the other council on.
Okay, Councillor Tufnell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. On 4.9 on page 36, Richmond South, just suggest saying there that the work is continuing. Do we have a concern about the timeline of this? Having seen some of the other development that's happened locally, like Richmond West, the rate of housing down there doesn't seem to have decreased at all. In fact, it almost looks frightening. I'm just wondering how the timeline planning is going with Richmond South, and are we concerned?
Through the chair. We're not concerned at the moment. Part of the reason for the slowdown is very similar to the response we've had in Mapua, where our advice has been to take a step back and look at Richmond as a whole rather than just Richmond South. We need to look at, if we start opening up Richmond South, what does that mean in terms of trying to get higher densities in Richmond itself and making the best use of the land we've got. So there's those kind of considerations we're working through, but also there's the infrastructure consideration for Richmond South. There's projects in the LTP in relation to that, and Welter's certainly doing some work around the planning and what we might need to do in terms of stormwater in particular for Richmond South. So there's a lot of work still going on in the background.
Yeah, thank you. I certainly appreciate that, because I mean we have the other areas like Wakefield and Brightwater too, who are obviously getting closer to coming on stream. So it's the total FDS, isn't it, that we need to be concerned about. But it just the Richmond South one just seems to me to be one area where it's really going to require a lot of very precise planning in that, because of the layout of the land and where we're heading and the connectivity between it and the other parts of what was the old borough. Thank you.
It certainly will, but the one thing that I am seeing is building is starting to slow down when you talk to developers and builders, councillor. So that's possibly a good thing. Councillor Dowler, you were next.
Yeah, mine is to do with the places of significance to marry. 7 or 8 years ago at this table, I brought it up after a discussion at the marae one day in Motueka about there's some areas in Motueka that have actually been identified as burial sites, etc. There's a couple of large plots of land, and right smack in the middle, there's a gravestone, or whatever you want to call it, a plot with a headstone and etc. on it. Now, the iwi were looking at trying to subdivide that little strip around that and out to the road to make it a sacred area, I suppose, and then the rest of the land that was left could be developed. And in one particular case, I think there's enough room for 6 houses. The issue that they were having was the fact that they had to go through the full subdivision process. For some reason, they were going to get smacked with development contributions and all sorts of stuff, which made it totally unviable. And so they have never bothered to pursue it. I just hope, Matt, that maybe in the TEP, future development, as we go along, that somehow we can make some provision for that to happen. Because they're going to just end up with a little 2-metre wide walkway down to this plot, and and they'll fence it off and everything, and it just becomes a sacred area, and then around it can become developed land with houses on. Is a thing. So I'm just pointing that out, that was a discussion years ago, and it hasn't been brought to the table. I haven't brought it this term that I've been here, but today is the opportunity for me to mention that I do think that we need to take that forward. Now it's been mentioned in here like it has been, if it can be. Thank you.
We obviously take that on board. Councillor Ogilvie.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And going back to the FDS and relating that to the Mapua structure plan, with this, and I suppose swapping it through to the Motueka structure plan and the Kainga Ora and Wakatu decision, which we've just been told about, what's the process in terms of, I suppose, the plan change from deferred to residential, and the structure plan that was included in the FDS decisions? So what's the next stages in terms of that whole development for Motueka West, in terms of the subdivision, the transport issue that Councillor Dowler mentioned, and those other aspects as well?
Okay, so through the chair, the Motueka West plan change, which is an area that was identified through the future development strategy, was put on hold, and we've now resumed conversations with Wakatu and NRATE. So we're just waiting for a response from them to resume those conversations based on that decision, that document being signed yesterday. There was no structure plan as such identified in the future development strategy. It was just the plan change that we were looking at, putting higher density in that parcel of land, which is currently deferred residential. So it was increasing the densities, similar to what we've done with the plan changes in Wakefield and Brightwater.
Can I just add that I was talking to Kim yesterday, who ran me through this, and he's got a very much a helicopter view of this. You know, we're looking at everything from the transport side of things to how that affects transport, roundabouts, and all that sort of stuff. Wasn't it it was designated resident? Sorry, there's some terminology here. You have to excuse me, but it is residential, but it's got an existing.
It's deferred, residential.
So it's just a case of lifting that.
Yeah, and that servicing is ready to be lifted now, from what I understand.
I thought, however, it was the same arrangement as it is for Mapua. We're going to have a structure plan which will involve the same sort of public engagement and consultation that Mapua is happening. So are you saying we're not going to have that at all? It'll be handled at staff level solely. Is that the message I'm getting from you, Anna?
There's been no structure plan identified for that site at the moment. We've done 2 rounds of consultation on the plan change before it was put on hold. So we'll re-engage and start doing more consultation as part of that plan change, unless there's a direction, I guess, to prepare a structure plan for it.
Right, so what's I'm going to lost your way to from here, because I really thought we were going to proceed with the same sort of situation as was happening in Mapua. I thought the FDS actually required that, but I have to go back and check the FDS decision to
I might ask Barry if you could just comment. I don't recall it. I remember we put it on hold because of Wakatu not wanting to proceed at that time, but I'll let the staff answer.
Yeah, through the chair, that's the intention. So the conversations have been directly with the landowner or the representatives of the landowner, which has been NRACE and Wakatu. So both of those areas have multiple ownership, which is one of the challenges with developing those areas. Certainly the conversations with Wakatu around their plans for how they want to develop in the future with multiple densities and different ownership models and things. That's certainly the nature of the conversations, not rather than a structured plan per se.
So just a straight question then, what, if any, involvement will the public have?
Anna, I thought you said another round of consultation.
Yeah, so we'll be advising the public that we're going to continue. Well, we need to discuss it with Wakatu and NRACE first. So once we resume those conversations, we'll get direction from them on how they want to engage with mana whenua, as well as the community. We will resume that those discussions.
I know that's
which in the past
that's
involved
site specific though, isn't it, as opposed to a complete structure plan conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
so it's very site specific. So we've got an operative district plan, sorry, whatever we call it here, but district plan at the moment, which allows for whatever development has been allowed for in the past. So the conversations are not, correct me if I'm wrong, they're not specific, they're specific to a block of land as opposed to the whole of the town. Is that what we're saying? Yeah.
As Councillor Dale has indicated, there's sort of transport issues there. There's also parks and reserves issues, as well as housing size and the likes. There are a lot of issues there, which I think the public will not have input into. That's where I'm coming from, basically. Whether it's, I take the point it's site specific, certainly. We're not talking about Motueka as a whole, we're looking at the Motueka West development, which has got, I think, 200 sections in the process. So that's where I'm coming from.
But that won't touch on the points you're making, because we're dealing specifically with a site for proposed development. Yeah, Anna? Yeah.
I won't, but I thought if there are transport issues, those need to be brought to the attention of the staff.
I can give you assurances that certainly we're well aware of those transport issues, and I've seen some maps that show things going on.
All right, so if there are no other questions, the report has been moved. Councillor Dowler, seconded Councillor Ogilvie. We'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Then we just move quickly to my chair's report, which you can take as read. And we did this last public because I wanted to particularly thank those of you that are retiring and to thank those that have put a huge amount of time into workshops that we've done on the TEP. It isn't just attending this committee, it's the hours and hours and days that we put into the TEP. So I wanted to specifically thank people, and just I made some notes there on things that are in front of us, and it was interesting to have the minister today here as well, and it's quite relevant, I think. It's going to be an interesting next 3 years, those of us that may be here and may not. And again, I wish all of you that are entering retirement a long and enjoyable one. Because I think you were actually thanked properly by the Mayor last week, but seeing as the timing of this, it's appropriate. So I did thank the staff, I think, in the report in particular. And in particular, Barry's staff and yours, John. I'm very aware of the workload that you guys have got in particular. And I just look at the program, and you're going to have to set priorities. Simple as that, because when I look at the number of times I saw Lisa's name in front of certain projects, I just thought, how's she doing all that work? And I spent a lot of time talking to Barry and the amount of work that has gone into Kora Waipupu Springs and other things that we've done. It's not a small job, but I think we seem to be able to attract policy planners in particular, a lot easier than we do resource consent planners for some reason. I think maybe it's a better area to work in. I'm not sure. But it's, I did thank the staff for my written report, and Stuart wants to say something, but we'll let Trevor go first and then Stuart.
Yeah, well, on behalf of one of the three that is moving on, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I wish you and all the other team all the best in your endeavours to get back and fight the good fight.
Yeah, right. Deputy Mayor Brian, you didn't go to
Mr.
sleep.
Chairman, just like to firstly move your report and just thank you for the passion and enthusiasm that you've put into looking after this committee strategy and policy. You've been really dedicated to the cause, and I think that's really should be acknowledged by us all. And once again, my thanks to all those elected members and staff for all they've done for this triennium. It's been a real learning curve for us all, I must say. But yeah, thank you for the work you've done in particular, Kit.
Thank you for that. So it's moved and seconded, Councillor Dowler. I'll put my report. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carry. We have to now move into committee, and I'm not sure how long this will take. So we might move into committee, work for a quarter of an hour and then take a break, depending on how long. But if it looks like we're going to get through it quickly, we could keep going till 1 o'clock. But we'll see. So the reasons for it to be excluded are detailed in the run sheet here. The general subject matter is to be considered while the public is excluded. The reason for passing the resolution is in relation to each matter and specific grounds under section 48(1) of the Local Government and Official Information and Meetings Act. And the resolution follows. The resolution is made in reliance of section 41A of the Local Government and Official Information Act, and particular interest or interest protected under section 6 and section 7 of the Act, which could be prejudicial to the holding or relevant part of the proceedings. Okay, so would someone like to move? So Hill, seconded, Councillor Butler. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carry.